Hello and welcome. I'm Theresa Muñoz. I'm Research Associate in Contemporary Poetry at Newcastle University. I'm also Director of the Newcastle Poetry Festival. I'm very pleased tonight to introduce this event, the James Barrie Poetry Prize reading with Kaycee Hill and Marjorie Lotfi with Neil Astley and myself. I'll just begin by saying a bit about the prize. The James Barrie Poetry Prize is Britain's first and only poetry prize, offering both expert mentoring and book publication by Bloodaxe for young or emerging poets of color. We launched in April 2021, and it was wonderful at the time to receive such great feedback on the prize. We received over 100 entries, and it was a difficult task for myself, Neil, Sinead Morrissey, Natalie Teitler, and Jacob Sam LaRose to whittle it down to a short list of 7 and then to pick 3 winners. The first winners of the James Barrie Poetry Prize were Kaycee Hill, who is mentored by Malika Booker, and Marjorie Lotfi, mentored by Mimi Calvati. And the debut collection by the third winner, Yvette Siegert, will be published in 2025. The prize is part of an inclusivity project devised for Bloodaxe by Natalie Teitler with Booker Prize winner Bernardine Evaristo, whose own debut poetry book, Lara, is published by Bloodaxe. The prize is named in honor of James Barrie, one of the first Black writers in Britain to receive wider recognition. He emigrated from Jamaica in 1948 and took a job with the British Telecom, where he spent much of his working life until he was able to support himself from his writing. He rose to prominence in 1981 when he won the National Poetry Competition. James Barrie's numerous books include 2 anthologies of Caribbean British poetry, Bluefoot Traveller, News for Babylon, and A Story I Am In, Selected Poems, which draws on 5 early collections, including Windrush songs, published to mark the 200th anniversary of the abolition of the slave trade. James also inspired and helped younger poets who came after him, most notably Raymond Antrobus and Hannah Lowe, who returned the favor by giving him their personal support in his later years. I look forward now to hearing the exciting eco-urban poems of Kaycee Hill and the thoughtful, precise lines on love, life, and immigration from Marjorie Lotfi. I'll hand it over to Neil, who will introduce the poets and say more about the prize. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Theresa. And 100 submissions doesn't sound much in terms of poetry competitions, which get thousands, but these are submissions of portfolios towards the first collection. So that, it's a much narrower field of submissions. Now, the second James Barrie Poetry Prize will be open for submissions in April 2024. As with the inaugural prize, the 3 equal winners of the second James Barrie Poetry Prize would each receive year-long mentoring during 2024 to 25, plus £1,000, and publication of their debut collections with Bloodaxe in 2026. Theresa and I will be joined as judges in 2024 by Natalie Teitler, who's a judge of the first round and a diversity specialist, and helped devise the prize, by Imtiaz Darka, who we are honoured to have as Chancellor of Newcastle University, and by the American poet and Professor Major Jackson, who teaches at Vanderbilt University in the US and has worked with Newcastle University on previous projects. The 2024 winning poets will be mentored by poets Patience Agbabi, Karen McCarthy-Wolf, and Jacob Sam LaRose, one of the judges of the inaugural prize. The original prize received special funding from Arts Council England to run the prize as a pilot project in partnership with Bloodaxe Books. The 2024 James Barrie Poetry Prize is supported by an uplift in Bloodaxe's Arts Council National Portfolio Organisation funding for the next 3 years, designated for inclusivity projects. It's free to enter, open to Black and minority ethnic poets who have not published a book-length collection, with special consideration given to LGBTQ+ and disabled poets and poets from disadvantaged socio-economic backgrounds. And the prize will be open for submissions from the 1st of April next year until the 31st of July. And now I'll introduce our poets, and I'll call them up in order, but I'll tell you about both of them in turn. Kaycee Hill is a poet, creative and professional writing graduate, and a digital mixed media artist. She's now based near Bristol. She was born in Winchester and grew up in a working class mixed heritage household, British and Caribbean in Andover. And we're very pleased to welcome tonight her mother and her sister, who've come all the way up from Hampshire for tonight's event. She was selected for Poetry Ambassadors during the height of the pandemic and was a shortlisted poet for the Poetry London mentoring scheme in 2020 and has been commended for her poetry by the Young Poets Network. She spent some years working within the healthcare sector as a domiciliary carer and a support worker for adults with mild learning difficulties. She believes it's a role wherein you learn everything there is about humanity, and she defines herself as an urban voyeur, with much of her urge to write taken from the spry mundanity of inner city life. So we look forward to hearing her shortly reading from her collection called Hot Sauce. Marjorie Lotfi was born in New Orleans and moved to Tehran as a baby with her American mother and Persian father, and fled Iran with one suitcase and an hour's notice during the Iranian Revolution. After waiting with her family for her father's return in her mother's tiny hometown in Ohio, she lived in different parts of the US before moving to New York as a young lawyer in 1996, and then back and forth to the UK, settling in the UK in 1999 and in Scotland in 2005, and she now lives in Edinburgh. And she's previously published a pamphlet, Refuge, poems about her childhood in revolutionary Iran. That was published in 2018. And her prize-winning collection is also a Poetry Book Society recommendation, and it received a wonderful review in The Guardian on Saturday. Marjorie also founded the Belonging Project, considering the experiences of refugees with over 15,000 participants across Scotland. She's a co-founder and director of the charity Open Book. She's co-editor of New Writing Scotland and chair of the board of Stanza, Scotland's International Poetry Festival. But before we hear from them, Kaycee Hill, followed by Marjorie Lotfi, something else. Tonight, we're also celebrating the work of two of the three winners of the inaugural James Berry Poetry Prize, but it's also a time of sadness. Earlier this week, I heard that Myra Bars, James Berry's partner and literary executor, had just died from cancer. She worked tirelessly to support James, especially in his final years when he suffered from dementia. We're shortly going to see a video of James reading his poem, England Voice. This is an extract from a film by Pamela Robertson Pierce of his reading of several poems at his flat in Chiswick, which we made with him in 2007. We only realised when we arrived there just how much Myra had done to make this work, rehearsing the poems with him over and over again until he felt able to give of his best. He was always a fluent and powerful reader, but this was just at that time, 10 years before his death, when he'd had to stop giving public readings because of his dementia coming in to affect him. But in this informal reading, you'll still get a great sense of James as he was. So first of all, we're going to hear James Berry.
Yes, it's a sort of a village voice kind of character. England voice. I prepare, and prepare well for England. Me decide and done leave behind all the voice of a slave estate bushman. None of that district bad talk in England, that bush talk of old estate slave man. Hear me speak in England, and see you don't think I a England native. Me nah go say, boy, how you do? Me I go say, how are you, old man? Me nah go say, what you yam last night? Me I go say, what did you have for supper? Patois talk is bushman talk. People who talk patois them damn lazy. Because me bush voice so settle in me and might let me down in a England. Me a practice talk like teacher, till me England voice come out a me, like water from hillside rock. Even if you fellows here don't hear me England voice, I have it and hear it in me head.
Kaycee Hill.
Hi, I'm really happy to be here. I just wanted to say thank you to Bloodaxe and NCLA for choosing me as one of the prize winners and putting on this wonderful event. I think I've been pretty vocal about how life-changing this has been. And I think it's amazing that we can all come together for a night of poetry that is inherent to our heritage, particularly as there's so much fear and uncertainty in the world right now. And I think it's only fitting that I've got a whole cohort of my nearest and dearest in the front row that I read from the first section in the collection, which is called For You, For You. And the first poem in this section is called Muse. I'm overpowered by desire, and it's all Aphrodite's fault. Sappho, translated by Josephine Balmer. From my bedroom window, I turn to standing stone, solidifying the image like a painter or a thief. I watch you step off into blackness, study your hands gloved, fluorescent, busying the wheel, feeling along its scuffed teeth, then pausing, where the fingers know what they know, used to probing the skins of peaches. Inside the dark which dares to call itself morning, I catch your almond head, asphyxiated by its surgical mask. Then off you go, helmeted, camouflaged, except for the bike light blinking off on, off on, off on, pulsing out of the depths like plasma, and the formation of your profile gone soon after, swallowed up by the street's unlatched jaw. I hope that you are warm. My dressing gown still preserves your shape. And from our bed, as I fold in on myself, outside glints saffron yellow, lit by electrical sentries. A caged thing freed. Your mouth slips out a sound of the world dying and reborn again. An utterance of expanding space, time, sound flinging out of your warm fleshy mouth, out from your pink oyster mushroom lips, and for a second, with your back burning white in the afternoon sun, you become an Arctic fox rolled over a damp, mossy log. Your poor hands dressed in skin stretch along my many grooves like a spill, round red knuckles flushing pale at the grip. The unfathomable patience we commit to prolong this shared annihilation, to remain inside the brink. I will take my time with you. Trace your temples, your chest, every palm crease, the constellation formed inside your spine's bow, the cool flint of your ankles. Through an open window, in the sun's fullness, a wasp sneaks in, dusting shadows over your nose bridge while our bed sheets knot themselves up. Here, I can hear your animal heart. Bang, bang, boom. Naturalist. I check if my head is still attached to my neck, if my heart still beats, if any teeth have let go, unfastened from sockets ground to powder, fusion of rapture and ache in equal measure. First comes sting, bliss, soon after, eyes roaming the cryptic dark of a just surfaced fantasy. Below, Genuine's pony mounts the subwoofer, chip shop vinegar cartwheels up the stairs. I feel like I've been initiated into new territories, like I could dip my fingers in the odd blotch staining the mattress and paint myself with it, bound through the village a howling thing. A robin chimes outside. I see her bright red breast, the thumping heart of a young, naked ash tree. Kitchen. This is only the second visit. The air hums of garlic, crushed and stewed in butter, and my taste buds twitch to taste it. Muscle memory. My small tongue salivates, coated in phantom broth. Sade wafts over wailing cats, a cricket bat whacked across blurs of ant heads. We're making jelly now. As I separate the juicy cubes, ripe with cow fat and pineapple, her little Bo Peep figurine shoots me this look, crook raised, to remind me how alien I am. Shapeshift. My mother's brown lifelines track across the sand of her palms, languidly joining like barking gulls in the place where secrets are formed or the wind speaks. There's a face, a woman's, a graveyard of trees or nipples pointing to Hades, dozing her stomach like roasted papayas, and a map with clear rivers, their shells softly turning, just to feel the sun close. This place is ancient as comb jelly, where the spawning ground dances with ideas in new combinations. A waltz for morning, snaking hips at war or the mambo in love. Excavate the clag, the clot, make a bright star from stone and from the mountains and the moors. Push yourself into the valley of ghosts. It's like the moon cracking herself open. It's like jiving bees. A woman in the shape of a beast in the shape of a woman. Dreams of home. Bare bottles of tonic wine line the windowsill. Goes down too damn easy, he says, like medicine, his voice lagging, thickening to cherry syrup. Homesickness is a symptom of displacement, separation, a meditation on our foundations. Ah, Jamaica. He travels there in a boat of smoke. Me soon come, me soon come. Figures or spirits swim throughout the brain grey of his eyelids, where everything is in a state of becoming. And when my grandfather, the innate sailor, reaches the shore, he moors himself to a small black sun. Souls break open among ripened mangoes and black-billed parrots, the root aroma of yams shucked back, disclosing all that yellow flesh. Still, Jamaica pains him, like a new bruise pressed. And over there, on glaring white sand, his young love picking out her dreadlocks with a limestone comb. He roams barefoot, reaches an ackee tree budding golden rings and reams of trawl net baked into bones. Jar, free my skin, free my mind, my body. Below a colossal canopy of yellow, black, and green, a boy with my grandfather's face sleeps soundly, harvesting mislaid memories like queen conch pearls. The next poem I'm going to read is for my friend Aaron Bowman, who I sadly lost way too young. So this is dedicated to him, and it's called Ghost. Behind a car window soupy with breath and chill, a gilded-haired boy man is doubled over. In prayer or pain, it's hard to tell. Through the veil, his expression matches one of God's only son. Drooping head and eyelids padlocked, mouth open slightly as if he's bound to speak in the gift of tongues or rap along to Kendrick's new album. articulating lyrical melodies in blistering speed, full throttle in his seat. Anyone in their right mind could easily confuse that boy for the radio. Scores of memories sat on the passenger side. Kano, J. Huss, Bugsy Malone tearing the speaker wide. Driving village roads and going nowhere in particular. Sun squinting at the fat face of your watch. Another dedication, actually. The next poem I'm going to read is called Scuffing, and it's kind of giving testament to one of my mum's memories. So I would like to dedicate that to you, Mum. I picture my mother at 11 years old, bow-legged, pint-sized, confined in her uniform, eyes weary even then, pulled in at the corners, cast in hickory flecked with gold, the same shade Diana Ross and the Supremes wore on the cover of Cream of the Crop, shook those hips in. Gappy teeth, freckled cheeks, walking home from school, dragging new clerks against Salma Gundy brick, their leather-cracked cry trailing behind, like the music of a cabasa made from gourd, like bay leaves laughing, rice and peas boiling. I see her enjoying the scuffing, reveling in its wrongness, the desecration of shoes so dismally British, so hideous, mouth flung open to the sky, armed to the back teeth with glee and remembering. That pot of kiwi black polish under the sink, that will slide over the scuff like shea butter. I see her playing out the trouble she'd be in, hearing it, like an echo in an aluminium can. Great Nanny's voice rearing up over the ruins, the crime scene, then simmering down to a tiny puff of steam because she's 11, grown, a god. The gift. We take the passing of confectionery very seriously in my family. Mum eats rock slow, slow. She twists bows of plastic, won't rush to unwrap it, pushes out the rock's white tattooed head and works at it like a whetstone. Her mouth drones, the sound of gratitude, of memories plunging in. First time away, hands rummaging through a crate of crab toys and shape-shifting fish magnets, stopping stock still at multitudes of candied rock, almost violent in their prismatic pigments, grinning in pristine rows. A 50p burning in her palm like a glob of molten rock as she makes her choice of aniseed and cherry. In our lineage, we were destined for sweetness, a verb hiding in the mouth of an oyster. I kissed the stick of rock twice before posting it. A young seagull called out for its mother. And the last poem I'm going to read, which is entitled Last Shift at St. Wynn's. I know Neil touched on it a little bit, but I spent a lot of time working in the healthcare sector, and this was kind of a reflection on that last shift. You laugh as I hold out my hands, my blue plastic-wrapped fingers, and try a few aimless notes, vows bouncing all around us, a mirage of floating faces reflected in white tile. You look over me with your small, ripe eyes, those ruinous black pupils, creased lids pulsing like you're trying to say something. I'm listening, but I'm still unable to decode the message. And you cup your wilting hands into ramekins, one for each of us, as if to say, I know you see me, I see you too. Thank you.
Welcome, Marjorie Lotfi.
feel like we should pause for a minute after those beautiful poems. Thank you, Kaycee. So I will take a moment to say thanks to Neil and Theresa and the staff of NCLA. I know I'm a quiet talker, so I'm going to move this microphone closer. And also particularly to Mimi, who was an amazing mentor and a support throughout a whole year. I think in some ways, although it's wonderful to have a publication with Bloodaxe, but the surprise was the gift of mentorship, particularly if you spend a lot of time working with other people. To have someone pay attention to your work is a huge gift. So that was such a treat. But thank you to everyone who's made this possible. I just want to introduce the book. The book has two parts. The first part is really about my childhood in Iran and what it was like getting out, and some of the family stories about migration, which I'm going to largely read from tonight because I feel like I don't have much of a choice with the news around us as it is. It feels like it brings to life some of those stories. But I want to say there are poems in the second half about Scotland, about love, about lighthouses and keeping on the light. And I'll read a couple from there, but I'm going to focus largely on the beginning, or the first half. So the first poem I thought I would read is a poem I wrote long ago when the nuclear arms treaty was being signed with Iran, and everyone asked me what I thought about Iran being in the news. And I never know what to say to these, even now I never know what to say, because those of us who have family embroiled in conflicts, of course, have personal stories as well as the political. So I wrote this poem in kind of a rage, thinking I would memorize it and recite it to people. I've never done that, but maybe I should. And it has a couple of things I'll tell you about. One is the reference to Chahar Shambe Suri, which is a Iranian holiday, which is a bit like Bonfire Night here, really fun, and the night before New Year, or the Wednesday before New Year. And the second is a reference to the last really happy memory I have of Iran, which was my mum taking us swimming in the dark, tucking me under her kind of wing and saying, come on, there's something I want to show you, but she wouldn't tell me what it was. It's called On Seeing Iran in the News, I Want to Say. On seeing Iran in the news, I want to say my grandmother was called Nasreen, that she died 2 years ago in Tabriz, and I couldn't go to say goodbye, that she knew nothing of power, nuclear or otherwise. I want to say that the bonfires for Chahar Shambe Suri were built by our neighbors' hands. So as children, we were taught to jump over and not be caught by the flames. I want to say my cousin Elnaz, the one born after I left, has a son and 2 degrees in chemistry and trouble finding a job. I want to say that the night we swam towards the moon hanging over the horizon of the Caspian Sea, we found ourselves kneeling on a sandbar we couldn't see, like a last gift. I want to say I'm the wrong person to ask. So as Neil said, my mum is an American, and she's a sort of 5'10" blonde Methodist American. So there was no real hiding for her during the Revolution, even when she wore a chador. But my parents didn't want to leave because they really believed in what was changing there, and in the need for a change of government, although nobody could see what was coming. So they took us to see demonstrations and all sorts of things that we shouldn't have seen, really. But what I think is interesting is that she had had real trouble at the end because it was unsafe for her to be outside, it was unsafe for her to be alone. And we often think of racism or the concerns many of us encounter as being one-sided, but of course for her, it was the other way just before we left Iran. So this next poem is about some of those things we saw as kids. It's called Shut Out the Noise. Close your eyes, cup your hands over your ears, then speak. Say, the day they shot all the doctors at the hospital for refusing to hide bodies, I was the girl watching from her grandmother's rooftop. Say, the staccato of sniper fire was a call to prayer, and the nightly track of tanks, a low toll of bell, almost pressure of sound than sound itself. Say the fire at our school was set, or the man dressed in white robes, walking our blacked-out road after curfew, asked a question without opening his mouth. Say the words on every brick hurtled through our window. Yankee, go home. So as things became less and less safe for Mum, my brother and I were sent out as little children to do the shopping, which we thought was great because we'd never known such freedom. But one morning, and there were curfews at the time, so we weren't allowed out at certain periods. One morning we went out to get the bread, I think, and my mother's cigarettes at a time when it was okay for children to be sent out for their parents' cigarettes. It was really quiet. And this next poem is about that kind of surprise at finding the world you know very well suddenly changed. And of course, as all young children, just wanting it to go back to normal. It's called Crossing the Street for Mother's Cigarettes. Crossing the street for Mother's cigarettes, she is blonde, she is American. To the shop a block from home, I skip over shrapnel, the vestige of last night. The curfew and blackout, a clash I heard through my window, and wonder at the constitution of puddles. Water? Gasoline? Blood? I have been taught to cross this road, busy with traffic, with care. Tehran drivers don't watch for small children. But this morning, the road is silent. I cross it, first looking both ways, then again, half expecting, half willing those cars I can almost still hear to reappear. In that first part of the book, there are a few poems about Gaza, and I feel it's only right to read one of them. The two of them were responding to images that came through the Times newspaper. And this first one that I'll read is of a picture of a little girl running through the Barij refugee camp in Gaza, holding an even smaller boy. And if you can imagine, she's in yellow dungarees and the boy is leaning back. And everything around them is gray except for this little yellow set of dungarees. And sadly, I wrote the poem in 2014. Picture of girl and small boy, Barij, Gaza, 2014. I would like to tell her not to wear such flimsy shoes, that rubble contains the whole spectrum of knowable and unknowable dangers. Sheets of metal, ripped to knife's edge, live wires, bloated arms reaching for light. Her hair, scraped back into a ponytail, is open to sky. Remnants of buildings filter down one concrete chunk at a time, and the midday bells of rockets ring out above her. She carries a boy on her still narrow hips, his legs entwined around her yellow dungarees. Like a rodeo rider, his left arm grips her shoulder to steady himself or her, while his torso reels back and away. His body is asking to slow down, to turn back. Instead, her eyes comb the ground for a next step, fingers of her free hand curled into a claw, as if to frighten off what she somehow sees ahead. And I'm going to move from those poems of the experience of being, as a child particularly, in the middle of a revolution to what happens when you land. And a lot of the book is sort of interested in that idea of how long it takes to become part of a place. I'm still asking that question. I've now lived in Britain longer than I've lived anywhere else, although I don't sound it. So this poem, which actually opens the collection, is called Refuge, and it's about a sculpture by Francis Bruno Catalano, which is of a man, if you can imagine, a bronze statue of a man holding a suitcase. But what's remarkable about the statue is that most of it is gone. So his head and his His shoulders are there, and his suitcase and arm is there, and then very little of the sort of knees on down is there. So as soon as you see it, your brain starts trying to figure out how it's standing up, which I think is a really lovely image for someone who lands here. And of course, I thought of my father when he finally got out. Refuge. Take out his heart, lungs, one arm, the whole belly, and the belt strap that holds it all in place. Let the lighthouse beacon throw its false light through him, promise safe passage. Take out his thighs, but leave his knees to buckle at kindness and the lack of it. Don't loosen his grip on the suitcase. It holds all he owns. Instead, nail his feet to the planks of the pier and let him try to take another step. And of course, I have lots of family that have grown old and died in places that aren't home. And I think I'll read a couple of those. The first is about my great-great-great-aunt, who was separated from her daughter Sogra at the Iranian-Azerbaijani border in 1917. And although there were only 150 miles between Baku and Tabriz, she never heard from or saw her again. What's lovely is that the family image of her that they had graces the cover of the book. And my father's memory of her was that she lost her mind with grief and circled the garden all day long, just speaking to herself. So I thought I would give her a voice. Khanum. I am not interested in Bolsheviks. Instead, it's the way light fell across my daughter's sleeping face, how she ate pomegranate, mouth brimming with tiny jewels, the way her nostrils would flare at the sight of mulberries. But when offered, tarofing she'd eat. Like swallows we migrate, but there's no spring and no autumn in this place. Along with the samovar and the janamaz, I was walked from Baku across the border, 150 miles, a distance I measured in the steps it would take to return. Now, in Tabriz, my grandson skips into the courtyard where I spend daylight, wearing a path around the lilting fountain, speaking to the birds. He sits next to me under the mulberry tree and listens before asking if he can send a message back home too. My own grandmother, after the passing of my grandfather, became a kind of businesswoman in her own right. And I learned later after her death that she never really wanted to get married. She wanted to be a teacher, but her parents thought otherwise, so she was married off. And then I think she kind of got her own comeuppance, because when her husband passed away, she bought some shops and stalls in the bazaar and ended up buying flats and was a real businesswoman in her own right. But then as she got older, she was moved by my father, rightly, I guess, to the States. And I always wondered what it was like for her to be in this country where she didn't speak the language, and suddenly she was reduced to quite a small woman in a hijab in a country where she couldn't really communicate. So this next poem's about her. It's called Granddaughter, I Entered Your Mother's House. Granddaughter, I entered your mother's house as I entered every house, head covered, shoes off. I wore a black chador for all my outings. Your mother said, black is for funerals. What she didn't know was that I agreed. This funeral of a life. I'd been in mourning since my wedding. I entered my son's house as a stranger, reading each carpet as I might almond trees in bloom, or bolts of cloth to determine yield, how much they might fetch. Your parents prospered, didn't smile. I placed my shoes at the front door as is only proper. Bebachshid, they said, beshin inja, pointing to the largest lounge chair. I wanted to drop to the ground, fold my heels beneath me. I wanted to speak in the old language, the one your mother hadn't learned. But instead, I sank into the seat with a flick of the head, saying, Khayli Mamnoon, as if grateful, remembering how hard it is in this foreign land to keep holding the spine straight, to keep looking down. I'm proud to say that I'm now a British citizen as of this year, but I kept having this recurring dream when I was able to vote in Scotland, which I had the right to do earlier than becoming a citizen, that they would somehow turn me away. It became a kind of fear. So this next poem is about my first time voting and also that dream. Citizen. In my dream, it is always black and white, a line of people waiting, the stone building, fists of flyers, a glass door framed in steel. An old woman takes my name, checks it against her printout. Her pencil slides through the letters of the registered. I wonder again if I've gotten it wrong. In my dream, she asked me to say it again, Lotfi, spell it out, before turning me away. In my dream, I push through the exit and walk home in rain to a house that isn't mine, in a country that isn't mine. And then this last poem that closes the collection, which is ostensibly about a crabapple tree, which was found on an uninhabited Hebridean island. Scientists were excited about this tree because they think it has been there since the Ice Age, and they have no idea how it got there, sort of out with the range it should be able to live in or want to live in, and it had never been crossed with any other breed. Animals don't eat this particular kind, so it's a mystery. So they were excited about it. But of course, I saw the people that stay rather than the people who choose to leave, whether that's a farming community in Scotland or places like Iran where most of my family stayed through the conflict and are still there. And of course, I think it's relevant just now for the people who are choosing to stay in Gaza. So I'll leave you with this. Thanks for listening. The Hebridean crabapple. This I understand, the instinct to cling at any cost to the place you are rooted, to see another season through, though the others seed elsewhere. Even in this sedentary act, you push the limit. Winter becomes summer, becomes winter, and you are steadfast on your crag, your outcrop. No one knows the shape of your limbs against a darkening sky. You question the need to grow against the wind. Despite what they say, there's no mystery in simply holding on. And what is home, if not the choice, over and over again, to stay? Thank you.
I'd like to ask a question about how the mentoring works, because when the prize was announced, the basis of it was that the winners would get 3 in-person mentoring sessions, and they'd be in contact between by email and so on. But then we had the pandemic to deal with, so that I don't think that happened in all cases. I don't think everyone got 3 in-person sessions, but I think some of you used Zoom. I wonder whether you could talk about that aspect of it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me and Malika, it just didn't align that we could kind of meet up in real life. But we absolutely made up for it. Like, it was, I think we might have even had more sessions than what was initially put forward. Malika really went above and beyond to kind of jump on a call with me, even outside of those workshopping sessions when the collection was being kind of formed, right from the kind of those initial workshopping sessions, and then kind of curating the collection itself, to even things like, recently I did I ran my first poetry workshop, and I reached out to her to kind of say if she had any advice, jumped on a Zoom call with me straight away. And I think kind of during a time where people were feeling very isolated and not connected, having that even though it was virtually, it felt like we were in the room together. We kind of built that relationship and that comfortability with each other. And I think, yeah, it worked great. And also as well, kind of we have busy lives, and we are fitting this in around, like you said about kind of, I mean, hopefully one day, but right now it's not kind of my bread and butter. Like I've got a 9-to-5 that I have to do, and likewise with Malika. So we absolutely managed to fit it all in. And yeah, we would do hours, put in the work in. And I think it worked really well. And so I don't feel like I kind of missed out on a part of the experience, kind of being face to face, because we probably spent more time together to make up for the fact that we couldn't get together face to face.
I had the opposite experience. I think Mimi was determined that we wouldn't do it on Zoom if we could. And I jumped on a train 3 times and came down and met her at the British Library, which was great too, because actually for me it meant kind of making space for those days and honouring them enough to take up a couple of days, find a place to stay with a friend. And I just was lucky that I was able to do that. And then sit with her for hours with paper everywhere, just kind of yes, no, her saying, no, that's okay, So there's quite a lot of push, but I needed that push because I spend a lot of time with poems and other people's poems too, so I needed someone to kind of give me that really hard kind of cut, as it were. And then she was really great when I would go back and say, no, I really want the crabapple to end this collection, and she was like, okay, but I like this one better. So, we had a lot of to and fro, but it took for me to go back and then say, no, it's important enough for me to challenge you again. At which point she was always like, look, it's you, that's great. So she was really got that correct for me, but we had time together, which I think she had just got fed up with Zoom at that point, because by the time I got to her, I had 100-odd poems, and she just didn't think it was going to work on Zoom to sit with them. So I was grateful that I was able to do it.
Yeah, but maybe in future we should allow that kind of flexibility in how we do the mentoring, if that's how it might work for people.
Yeah.
Noted. I'll just ask another question. How was it? Because it's a debut collection, and it tends to be a lot of what you've written up until now. So how was it putting it together? Did a lot make it to the end, or was there a lot left behind? And how was it putting the collection together in terms of the themes that you wanted to surface?
I think initially I kind of went into it like, I've got all these poems and they're all going to be part of this collection, and then it came to the culling process, and it's like, these poems don't speak to each other. They're not communicating. There's no sense of cohesion there, and I think that was really eye-opening for me, because fundamentally, this collection, I had some absolutely, some poems that I loved, very similar to you, but Malika was like, no, I don't think this works for this. Maybe a next collection, or maybe, a pamphlet, or maybe somewhere else. But it's absolutely not wasted words. I feel like as poets, we've all got a file somewhere of, poems that didn't quite make the cut. But that's not to say that they can't, become something else later on down the line. But I think that was really important for me to kind of, have all the individual pieces, have them all out, and then kind of do that curation process of seeing how are the, because, I'd write a poem and then maybe write a poem 4 months later, and then it was only when I had them kind of printed out and I'm looking at them and I'm like, oh no, these poems are talking to each other. And that wasn't even something that I had anticipated or that I set out to do. But I think when you've got that theme, like when it kind of comes to you, you just know in your gut kind of what works and what doesn't.
It's funny because I had kind of opposite advice from Mimi. Because I sent Mimi, I had so many. I mean, I've been, it's been a long time that I had been not doing anything with a whole lot of poems. And so the part of the prize, the gift for me was just making me do it, because I just hadn't done it. Or I hadn't tried to do it. I don't know if I would have succeeded. But, and Mimi said, it's your first collection. You just got to put the best poems in there. That's it. You can forget, that they've themes. Forget. Let's just pick, your favorite, the best 80 or so, and then we'll work out what speaks to each other, and a few will fall off. But actually, the ones that ended up here were speaking to each other, and often, like that crabapple tree, it's really about something else, So you might think it wouldn't fit in this collection, but actually it's about something else. So, yeah, for me, it was really about I knew it was going to have to be about Iran, even though I said to her, well, I've already done that. And she said, forget it, like, bring them back. People are going to read this collection that haven't read your pamphlets. It was a long time ago. We've just got to pick your best 80 and then work down from there in terms of what speaks to each other. And then I found that process of, like, working out what poems speak to each other on a page beautiful, because it's often not the poems that you think they're going to be.
For sure.
And, you know, you might have one about something and then you think they're completely different poems, but actually there's something in them that they complement each other. They mean more as a double than they do individually. So yeah, it was a really wonderful process to do with Mimi, and she was very patient with me.
We've got time, I think, for a couple of questions from the audience.
Any questions for now?
Not sure whether we've got a travelling mic. Have we? Yes, we've got a mic. Gentleman across there, far corner.
Thanks for that, guys. I really enjoyed. Can you hear me? Is that...
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. I just want to ask, both of you have got experience working with others in a creative sense, and this prize has obviously given you the opportunity to be working with someone else who has given you that mentorship. How has your own mentorship changed as a result? Because obviously it's a new experience being mentored. Now you're mentoring again. How's that changed, if that has at all?
Want me to answer
So
first?
that's mentoring and workshopping, effectively, isn't it?
You go first.
Yeah, I do a lot of working with other people on their work, largely to create it. So for me, a lot of the work I do and support other people to do is to lead and support creation of new work, which is different than being hard on someone, I think, and not hard on someone, but someone's work. I think Mimi is such, if you know her work, it's so precise, it's so perfectly careful, and in terms of so tight, I would say, that it's actually, sometimes I realize that I would try and tighten something so hard that it would kill it, which was an interesting process. But actually, I think largely it's made me be more careful with that and not be sloppy. So, and also she was incredibly generous in letting me have my own voice and my own way of doing things in a way that I think often when we're giving people advice, we're giving them, the danger is we're giving them advice to make their poem sound more like what we think is a good poem, and that's a danger. So watching her do that with me and not turn my poems into hers was a real eye-opener. But largely I try and steer away from that and just help people create work and then tell them to get together with other people and work on the other stuff, because that stuff is scarier.
Yeah, I think for me, it's been quite interesting, kind of the whole mentorship, mentee situation, because before Malika was my mentor, one of the endorsements on the back of the book is by a poet called Aviva Dorch, and she was my first mentor when I did the Poetry Ambassadors. I did a Poetry Ambassadors mentorship for Hampshire and Dorset, and they were two very different mentoring styles. So it was really interesting kind of going into this mentorship kind of under the assumption that mentoring is just one way, because, you know, I'd had one experience with mentoring and then I'd gone into it, and then having it be so completely different, I was kind of able to almost pinch the best bits that I've taken from that mentoring experience and emulate it. You know, it's very similar to when we read a poem that we absolutely love, and you're like, I've got to stop what I'm doing and I've got to try and just write something that, you know, makes someone feel the way this poem has made me feel. And it's similar with kind of mentoring, like when I've done kind of done workshopping, and I'm doing my masters as well, so I'm constantly having to kind of workshop my peers' works. And I think, yeah, the kind of that precision from Malika, and also something that I found really beneficial was Malika introduced me to poets that I wasn't familiar with, or, you know, which, I mean, it feels criminal to say now, but, you know, the works of people like Jericho Brown, someone like that, for his kind of level of musicality and things like that. And she could see what I was, in the initial stages, she could see what I was trying to do, but kind of knew that I needed a bit more of a, you know, here's some sources, go away, do some research and come back. And I think that was probably the most beneficial thing for me, was having that exposure to writers that I might not necessarily have come across if I hadn't have they hadn't been focused towards kind of black poetry or kind of black poetics. Yeah.
It's quite a skill matching mentees with mentors.
Yeah.
And I think we might congratulate ourselves that in your two cases...
You did a great job.
You did a great job. Because we have to work out, when we have the three mentors set up, then we have the winners, and we have to then do the difficult decision of matching you. But I think it was perfect this time.
Yeah, for sure.
Is there one more question? Oh. Give the mic to Mike.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just to ask what like the most valuable lesson was from your mentors. It sounds as though having like a second set of eyes in your work is quite valuable. But just anything else really, yeah.
There's so much. I think, and this kind of feels like a little bit of a cop-out, because I feel like it's something that gets kind of thrown around a lot, but it is the whole kind of kill your darlings. I think something that I was kind of guilty of in the beginning, and I think we're all guilty of, is kind of we're using this really rich, luscious language, and you can kind of bloat the line. You can write kind of so much that actually it's doing... I had a really interesting conversation with the poet Will Harris, and he essentially said that, and there were people that kind of clutched their pearls when he said this, but he said that sometimes he feels like kind of like metaphor and simile, that we as poets can use that as a crutch to actually hide behind getting to the truth of what it is that we're actually trying to say, and I bounced that idea off with Malika, and she kind of said, no, I think I can see where you're doing this. There's poems in the collection that are very personal, and are not just my experience, but the experience of, people that are close to me. And in order to do that justice, it's almost like I put a distance between myself and what I was trying to say by kind of using all this imagery, but actually stripping it back and making it concrete, actually getting to the point, enabled the poems to do what I was trying to do. So I think, it's a little bit of kind of advice, but I think that's probably the thing that has shaped not just this collection, but, the stuff that I'm writing beyond. I always have that in the back of my head, to kind of, yeah.
I think mine's it's similar. Mimi was tough on what she called kind of flowery language, or I would call it soft, like entirely soft. Yeah, and she was just saying, and luckily it wasn't my poem, but she was, giving examples of a way of saying someone sitting under a tree. And she said, it's best just to say someone sitting under a tree rather than, all the rest of it, because actually the words will get in the way of what you're trying to say. And especially for my subject matter, which can be pretty rough, thank you for listening to it, it can be hard, so it's better just to say it rather than try and dress it up.
Yeah.
So a lot of what she was saying is that's too flowery, or that's too, it didn't happen a lot, but a lot of the poems that went had that kind of almost magical or sort of slightly extra, and she would say, nope, it's too soft, or gotta go. And if you read Mimi's work, you can see why, because her work is so the other way. But yeah, I would say I now have that kind of searing eye of like, do I need all these words to describe that thing? And sometimes the answer is yes. Poor Neil, I took some of them out, and then a couple of months later said, actually, I need 6 of them back. But then I knew that I really wanted them because I had done some readings and thought, I'm missing those words. But it took that. So yeah, I think it was that serious searing and keeping the old drafts in case you decided you needed them back.
Yeah, for sure.
Theresa, do you want to finish off?
Yeah, of course. I think we're out of time then. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kaycee, Marjorie, and of course, Neil. And thank you to everyone in this room, actually, who also helped with all stages of the prize. Sinead Morrissey, Linda Anderson, and Melanie Birch, thank you. I just want to say that, unfortunately, next week's event, NCLA event with Jacqueline Crooks and Juliana Menza has been canceled. But the next NCLA event is on Thursday, the 23rd November, with Tanya Brannigan and Preeti Taneja. So we hope to see you at that. let's just give a hand to all the poets. And I love all the advice happening. Don't let your poetry get in the way of your poetry, essentially. I'm taking that home. Okay. So thank you, everyone, and let's give them all a hand.
Thank you.